Sunshine is most infamous for two things: its lack of polish and its cutscenes. And what happens when you mash those two things together? You get cutscenes that are rife with errors, glitches, and everyone's favorite, leftover beta elements. I've gone ahead and compiled all these inconsistencies into an Iceberg list to share with you guys today. Except for each level of the chart, we're not going to be using this tired old dusty iceberg image, oh no, but we're instead going to be using the Noki Bay waterfall from the spout down to the depths. Please enjoy. Our first level will be the spout of the waterfall, where we'll start with the minor and more well-known things. Peach earrings. This is possibly the most well-known thing about Sunshine's cutscenes. For a brief shot during the landing cutscene, Peach's earrings were mistakenly given the texture for her eyes. Oh god, the horror. Or, instead of a mistake, maybe it's symbolism for how she's really the only one who noticed or saw that something was off about this vacation. No, it's definitely just good old classic Sunshine jank. Red Ferris wheels. Speaking of Sunshine jank, there's one persisting half mistake, half beta remnant that's in like half the cutscenes. That's right, I'm talking about the Pianta Ferris wheel. In some shots, the Ferris wheel is actually red. Instead of the final purple color, it was given in the release of Sunshine. And of course, that's because in the beta, the Ferris wheel was red. In other shots, however, the Ferris wheel is just outright missing. Don't know really how they messed that one up. Oh yeah, and let's not forget that in the epilogue cutscene, there's a shot where both the beta red Ferris wheel and the final purple Ferris wheel are clipping inside of each other. Beta HUD stuff. There are some slightly different HUD elements in the flood tutorial cutscene. HUD elements, by the way, are just the icons on screen that give you information while you're playing. Basically, there's a slight blue outline around the nozzle icon that isn't there in the final game. The drop shadow for the water text is also blue in the cutscene when it's basically black in the actual game. Oh yeah, and also the blue graffiti circle behind the tank is opaque at the beginning of this cutscene, but switches to being see-through after Mario switches to the hover nozzle. For the record, in the game, it's always see-through. Different Mario models / Mario grows the neck. Different, usually higher quality Mario models are used in pretty much all of the cutscenes. However, there's one particular cutscene that uses a pretty uncanny model for Mario. During the epilogue cutscene, when Mario leans down to pick up Flood, he suddenly has a neck. A very freaky looking neck at that. I think it has to do with how they wanted the camera angle to see Mario's head in the shot or something, but it's honestly just creepy. Like his neck isn't even the right skin color, as if it came from somebody else. Beta Delfino Plaza. There are a lot of beta and or unfinished aspects to the stages shown off in the cutscenes. For instance, you already gotta look at the Ferris wheels, but by far the most beta content we get from the cutscenes is from none other than Delfino Plaza. For instance, take a look at this shot from the court cutscene. Let's even play some I Spy. How many differences can you count in this cutscene alone? 4? 5? Maybe 6 or 7? How about 12? 13 if you count the fact the plaza is supposed to be dark. Among the most interesting differences are this window that's just flat out missing, the somewhat well-known beta texture from the palm trees, the lack of a pipe on the island in the background, and my personal favorite change, this beta model for the hanging sign, which I liked so much that I decided to make a mock-up model of what it might have looked like in game. In the very next shot, we're treated with a few more minor differences, such as what the turbo door looked like before it was a turbo door, a beta exterior for the blue coin boathouse, as well as what I thought at first to be a cut island, but is actually probably just Peanut Island in an unfinished state. Oh yeah, and if you didn't notice between the last two shots, both the Gooper mound thing and the wanted posters are entirely missing. And for the final beta plaza shot from this cutscene, which is just a zoomed in shot of the last one, we get a better look at the missing turbo door and the beta boathouse. And now the orange Pianta lady is now gone for some reason. Very strange. In the very next shot, we get what appears to be a basically finished version of the plaza, which I find kind of weird. Maybe I'm just spoiled with Dolphin free cam and being able to easily capture screen footage at a whim, but I can't imagine it would have taken that long to go back and redo the previous shots in this version of the plaza. Not that I'm complaining, mind you, because we now get a slightly clearer view into the development of this game. There are a few more beta Delfino Plaza related things sprinkled across the other cutscenes, but they're interesting enough that they get their own spots on the Noki Bay chart. Still backgrounds. Some cutscenes use still images as backdrops instead of actually placing the characters into a 3D modeled world. So for instance, the short cutscene when Mario is being let loose from jail, you can tell the backgrounds here are just still images because the NPCs and the bird should be moving, but they're not. So what this cutscene probably originally looked like was something like this, with a bright magenta background. It's the same idea as a green screen, just they wouldn't have used green because of the Pianta skirts. If you look closely, you can actually see what I believe are some artifacts of this technique left behind, most prominently around the Pianta's tree stems. Those little dark red spots are what I think are the remnants of the magenta background. In fact, if you look at my recreation from earlier, you can see those exact same dark red spots around their tree stems. Although in mine, it is less noticeable, likely because of modern day technology. If you're like me and wondering why they didn't just put this cutscene in a 3D model Delfino Plaza, like most cutscenes are, well, that's going to take us down a very deep rabbit hole, so buckle up from the next century. Every cutscene uses a green screen. After coming to the conclusion that this cutscene used a green screen, that made me reconsider some weird things I had noted, but mostly brushed off about the other cutscenes, such as this weird perspective error on Mario, or how there seems to be remnants of green screen poking through Flood's tank here, a common issue when you're trying to green screen something that's transparent, or this bizarre error in the Bowser Jr. reveal cutscene, where the roller coaster appears to be like a flat image that was manually moved for each frame that the camera was moved. Okay, but why? Well, if we're taking the evidence of heavy green screen usage and the other cutscenes into account, then this is what likely happened. Early on in Sunshine's development, once the game's story was finalized, Nintendo decided to get the ball rolling as soon as possible when it came to the cutscenes. After all, 3D renders in the early 2000s were both expensive and took a long time to make. Nintendo, knowing for example that this cutscene would for sure have Mario talking to the cop Piantas, or Mecha Bowser's head flying away in this cutscene, got these parts of the cutscenes rendered first in front of a green screen. This was an overall very smart move because otherwise, we would have had cutscenes happening in noticeably different layouts of the levels. And obviously, waiting on the game to be finished to then begin the time-consuming process of making cutscenes was probably not an option, especially for a game as rushed as Sunshine, which was basically being worked on until the bell. And all of that is not even to mention that they'd want the cutscenes for marketing material. More on that very soon. Now that I've set the scene for why Nintendo would have wanted to use green screens for their cutscenes, I'm going to ask you to imagine this. Nintendo is now recording green screen footage of Mecha Bowser flying away before they finish Pinna, let alone the roller coaster. They might not even know where this cutscene is going to take place on Isle Delfino. With that in mind, it would have been impossible for Nintendo to account for the fact that the roller coaster would be partially blocking vision of Mecha Bowser in the final version of the cutscene. So the roundabout solution would be the green screen Mecha Bowser onto Pinna Park without the roller coaster, but then try to add the roller coaster back in post. Now, this whole green screen thing would just be a well-evidenced theory if not for this one final nail in the coffin.
GameCube スーパーマリオ最高の大冒険がゲームキューブでついに実現
These are commercials for Super Mario Sunshine. Now, aside from this exciting peek at beta content, which I don't have time to dissect in this video, you might have noticed that this shot of Mecha Bowser one-for-one matches the final game, minus of course the background. Same thing with this shot of Shadow Mario. That really just settles the matter altogether. Pretty much all of the cutscenes in Super Mario Sunshine use green screens. Now, as for why some cutscenes use still images as backgrounds while others use 3D environments, I think it came down to whether or not there was camera motion. If the camera is moving around a 3D environment, obviously the background can't be 2D. If the camera is just staying still, however, then Nintendo could, or at least thought they could get away with using a still 2D image. As a quick aside, I'd like to mention that this video was a massive undertaking. So if you'd like to support me and help me go full-time here on YouTube, then please consider joining my channel membership, which you can do by clicking the join button under this video. There are perks to joining, it's not just a donation. The Petey cutscene is wild. The Petey cutscene gets its own entire entry because there are like a dozen tiny glitches and inconsistencies that are just kind of weird. Let's list some of these off. Starting off, the skybox is a combined version of the release Bianco skybox and the Plaza skybox. Bianco has these light moving clouds, but it doesn't have the giant Yoshi-shaped clouds like the Plaza does. And of course, these two skyboxes are combined in the cutscene. Additionally, and weirdly, the vine thing on the left has an extra spike in the cutscene. And then there's the shadows for Petey and Mario, which are really weird, especially Mario's. First off, the angle of the shadows don't really make much sense at all. For the shadows to be casting at this angle, the sun would have to be here, but instead it's here. But more concerningly is that the head of Mario's shadow is detached. Is that foreshadowing? When Petey and Mario are falling, FLUDD stays oddly stationary relative to Mario. In fact, it seems like Mario clips through FLUDD as they're falling. And finally, if you just focus on the sky while Mario and Petey are falling, it kind of makes it seem like the entire windmill building is rotating around all over the place. I'm fairly certain this was an artistic choice to add to the chaos of the scene, but it's still interesting nonetheless. Gooper Blooper cutscene is wild. The Gooper Blooper cutscene is similar to the Petey one in that there are a ton of small but interesting inconsistencies throughout the cutscene, but still less than Petey. For one, you shouldn't be able to see the green crate through the crack. Then there's a zoom in shot of the crates right before Gooper Blooper bursts out. In this zoom in, you can see the top of Gooper Blooper, whereas you couldn't before. You can even see Goop Bloop start to jump before the crate explodes, which is kinda cool. When Goop is jumping, there's some slight clipping of its tentacles, and once it lands, you can actually notice that the ink pattern on its face is ever so slightly different, which I find to be interesting. Like, did this really need to be changed? Voice line mistakes. This might be a surprising fact to learn, but all versions of Sunshine use English voice acting for the cutscenes, no matter the language the game was intended for.
Quite an unusual device. Is it some sort of pump? Nice work, Mario. Quite an unusual device. Is it some sort of pump?
One thing I find incredibly interesting, however, is that between the Japanese versus non-Japanese releases, the court cutscene uses different takes for the Blue Pianta's voice lines.
As you are no doubt aware, someone has been senselessly defacing fair Isle Delfino using some paint-like substance. As you are no doubt aware, someone has been senselessly defacing fair Delfino Isle using some paint-like substance. Indeed, how can one not be aware of what is going on? Indeed, how can one not be aware of what is going on? Expert shine scholars have determined that this darkness has arisen because all of our guardians, the shine sprites, have vanished from their gathering spot at the Shine Gate. Expert shrine scholars have determined that this darkness has arisen because of all of our guardians, the shrine sprites, have vanished from their gathering spot at the Shrine Gate. The reason? It's quite obvious. The reason? It's quite obvious.
Yeah, you probably caught this yourselves, but in the Japanese version, the Blue Pianta's voice actor kept saying shrine sprites instead of shine sprites. So it's really no wonder that the voice lines were changed, or maybe even re-recorded for future releases of Sunshine. Beta birds. These sprayable coin birds used to be brown during some point of Sunshine's development. Throughout a good chunk of the cutscenes, you can actually see that for yourself. JP Plaza. And for the last entry in the waterfall section is JP Plaza, which refers to how any cutscene that shows the quote-unquote final version of the plaza doesn't really show the final version of the plaza. Let me explain. Barring regional differences, and of course 3D All-Stars, there are two main versions of Sunshine, which we'll be calling 1.0 and 1.1, although there is technically a version in between. In short, 1.0 is the version Nintendo released in Japan, and 1.1 is the version released everywhere else. Back before digital releases, it was common for Nintendo to release their games in Japan first, then overseas later. So the devs took that opportunity to work on the game just a little bit more, which is how we got 1.1. Again, we're just calling it 1.1 for the sake of the video. I don't think that's what it's officially called. Among bug fixes and a bunch of other minor tweaks, the 1.1 versions of Sunshine added a bunch of extra fruit to Delfino Plaza, which, for the record, is the main reason why the Japanese versions of Sunshine are faster for speedruns, as less fruit means slightly faster loading times into the plaza, which is a stage that you load at least 50 times during an 80% speedrun, and obviously more for longer categories. It actually has next to nothing to do with text scrolling, so please stop spreading that misinformation. Anyways, getting back on track now, since all of the cutscenes were at the latest recorded in Sunshine 1.0, that means that the fruit added in 1.1 don't appear in any of the cutscenes, regardless of what version you are playing. Burning building. Here's an interesting one. If you wait on the title screen for long enough, then a sort of demo cutscene will begin playing. Now, this cutscene is full of all types of interesting little details, most of which are too minor to mention in this video. Something that I do think is worth mentioning, however, is that there's a freaking burning building in the plaza. And if you have a particularly astute eye, you might have noticed that the smoke effect is the same one used on the pipe island with the deserted Pianta. This is an otherwise final looking version of the plaza, so I'm wondering if the smoke effect was removed because of some ESRB rating reason, or if we mod the game to re-add the smoke effect to the window, we can see that the 1-up it spawns is really easy to corner and catch, and also sometimes really easily clips through the building. Maybe that's why it was removed? Of course, that's assuming the smoke effect in the window also gave a 1-up. Honestly, who knows? Beta sounds. In that same demo cutscene, when Mario wall jumps, he just makes normal jumping sounds as opposed to the normal grunts he makes. And when collecting blue coins, they just make a normal coin collection sound. Later on in the demo cutscene, Mario makes a different noise when being flung by a cataquack. There are also some different noises that happen during the clip with Petey, particularly the brrr noise Mario makes when Petey pukes on him. On to the next entry. Beta map on the plane. Here's a big one. During the opening cutscene of the game, we get to see a map of Isle Delfino on the TV screen. But there's one very notable thing about this map. It is the beta map for Isle Delfino, not the map we get in the release. There's some things that immediately give this away, such as the docks coming out of Rico Harbor, the lack of a lake in Bianco, and the distinct lack of the iconic Delfino Plaza Canal. Another small detail is how the airstrip doesn't appear here. In fact, the airstrip used to be directly attached to Delfino Plaza, and it does kind of seem like that's where the plane is flying to. Of course, that version of the airstrip doesn't seem to be visible on this map. One more interesting thing about this map, the labels. Of course, the text is too jumbled to make anything out, and don't you dare suggest I use the 3D All-Stars version of this cutscene. One thing we can read into is the location of these labels. Of course, you can see one for Delfino Plaza, the two beaches, Corona Mountain, Pinna Park, and of course, Noki Bay, but this is where it gets really interesting. For one, Rico Harbor straight up doesn't have a label, despite its beta layout being clearly visible here. And then this label right here might be for Bianco Hills, although from what we know about the beta and the release of the game, this is way too far north for Bianco. On top of that, if this was supposed to be Bianco, it's kinda weird that it's on top of what appears to be a rock. Slightly north, there's another unknown label. If I had to guess, maybe this was for Airtoe Rock, a cut stage from the game. I'm assuming this label here is for Pianta Village, although it is slightly more north of what it is in release. And finally, there seems to be a label for a location in between Noki and Pianta, which doesn't appear in game, and I honestly don't really know what that'd be for. Aside from those, there are maybe map labels here and there, but the video compression is so strong that it's too hard to tell. Super interesting stuff overall though. There might be some connections I'm failing to make here, as there's quite a bit of deep information about the Sunshine beta that's not very well archived, so if there's a need, I might return to this map in a future video that goes over some of the less well-known information about Sunshine's beta. If and when that video comes out, being subscribed and hitting that bell, gamers, will keep you in the know. The bells in Shine Gate get dirty again. Still in the epilogue cutscene, we can see that the Shine Gate and the bells are dirty here. This is particularly funny if you clean them during your playthrough of the game, or maybe Piantissimo really is just that fast. Shadow Mario's paint changes colors. In all cutscenes with Shadow Mario, the color of the paint on his brush is the pink and yellow color of the goop from the airstrip. Where this gets weird is, for instance, in the plaza, where just after this cutscene, Shadow Mario is now painting with brown goop, and in fact has brown goop on his paintbrush. Or, if you look at Shadow Mario in Pinna 1, he has black paint on his paintbrush, although he doesn't paint. In the entire game, I think the only cutscene where this makes sense is, of course, on airstrip. Nintendo really thought we wouldn't notice this huge plot hole. This is absurd. Lightning round. There are a lot of small, little inconsistencies throughout the cutscenes that didn't warrant their own spots on this list, so I'm going to really quickly shotgun them out one after another. I'll also put a name for each cutscene in the top left. Here we go. The underside of the plane is weird. The Pianta the roller coaster looks photoshopped in because of the white outline. Is Mario wearing a turtleneck? He's also clipping through himself and weirdly balanced on his seat, like he's almost levitating. There are weird barrels in Delfino Plaza. They don't ever appear there, and they kind of look strange. Here, you can see beta textures for both Corona Mountain and the palm trees. They left Japanese characters in Flood's POV scan mode, which is honestly kind of cool. There seems to be a wooden bench behind Mario. There are two Piantas standing near where the goop should be, which, by the way, the goop is missing. I'll touch on that later in this video. There's extra fruit in the fruit stands. All the Piantas and Toads, except for Toadsworth, are missing. Peach and Bowser change position from cutscene to in-game. After beating Bowser, he suddenly becomes normally sized. It's not explained at all how he shrunk down, but I actually have a pretty good idea as to why, which you can hear about in my Why is Bowser So Big video. And oh yeah, his tear ducts are also see-through here for some reason. Earlier in this cutscene, this shot appears to take place in the first plaza based on the boat location. When Bowser, Bowser Jr., and Mario are falling, they're clearly just images and not 3D models. And here you can see the seam where the sky changes, which, by the way, that implies that the Bowser fight took place in space. Mario Galaxy before Mario Galaxy. Endpoints. While not necessarily a cutscene, the end portal animations are actually stored as a video file, which is close enough for me to give them their own section. This is what it looks like when you take it out of the game and play it as a video. It's rustic, shall we say. Despite it having a lower resolution than a Minecraft block, we, believe it or not, actually can make some details out. And you know what that means. There's some beta stuff going on. Starting with the bottom one, which is obviously gelato, there are 3 interesting things that I noticed. 1, there is no pinup park in the background, which you would expect to be behind the GBS hut. 2, the mirrors don't have any plungellos on them, but they're also not pointed up at the crystal ball thing like they normally are. If there's any implications to this, I don't know what they are. And 3, my favorite, the model for the Sandberg Tower is the beta version, which you can tell by these slender pillars that hold up the midsection. You can actually see a low poly version of this beta tower from in-game in Rico Harbor. And you can also see a pretty good quality picture of it when playing Sunshine's demo disc, which, by the way, I did a ton of research on and made a video about. Moving on to the Rico M portal, the first thing that caught my eye was the pin of Ferris wheel and the fact that it's red, which is nothing new by now. Other than that, it seems like the low detail version of Gelato is slightly different, judging by the fact that the long palm tree is not visible at all. And finally, let's move on to Bianco, which has something really interesting going on with it. Do you see it? How about if I zoom in? Still don't see anything? Well, of course you don't, because there's nothing noticeably different going on here. However, this isn't the case if we look at this video file from the Japanese version of Sunshine, which, unlike the other 2 M portals, was actually changed for overseas releases. Now looking at this, the mistake should be pretty obvious. There's a giant orange block attached to the windmill. This mistake is so noticeable, by the way, you can actually see it from in-game, which is probably why they re-recorded it for future releases of the game. Anyways, placing an unused variant of the Cheez-It block, or normal block as it's actually called, we can recreate exactly what's going on in the JP version of the Bianco M portal. I think the point of this was to be a sort of prototype for the Petey vines, since it functionally does the same thing by forcing you to hover around it. What's particularly puzzling though is that the vines are present in this video, so I guess at this point in time they just didn't have a collision or something, or maybe they just didn't get around to removing the block. And lastly, what I find equally fascinating is that the vines exist here entirely outside of their normal context. There's no Petey, no goop, and in-game, the vines in these tall windmill platforms don't ever appear in the same episode together. Either way, it's absolutely fascinating. Credits, postcards. During the credits cutscene, there are a bunch of what I think are supposed to be postcards, or maybe just pictures, of Mario & Co. having fun during their hard-earned vacation. And just as an aside, I actually love these so much. But it's so full of personality, and each one tells a little story of its own. They're honestly just great. Anyways, there are a ton of tiny little inconsistencies between the pictures, such as this one in Bianco Hills, which just seems kind of off with the reflections, and maybe even the positioning of the platforms too. The 2 pictures of Airship are kind of funny too, because it's very apparent that these locations for Peach and the Toads are the exact same as from the beginning of the game. Oh yeah, and the reaching down pose that Peach does to make sure Mario is alright is also kind of interesting, since I'm pretty sure that's not from an animation she normally has, whereas the Mario on the ground pose is just from the ground pound animation. Later on in a Rico picture, we can again see the red beta Ferris wheel. Aside from more small details, such as these palm trees in the pinna picture, there's not really a whole lot more to talk about with these pictures. So let's move on to the next section, the Undersea. Pianta Village used to require a rocket nozzle. During the court cutscene, we get this shot of the Shine Gate. Notice anything off? Now I don't know about you, but to me, the top of the Pianta Village pipe looks like it's blocked off with something black. Could it be that a super ground pound block used to, well, block access to Pianta Village to make it all but required to have a rocket nozzle to enter? For those unaware, it's possible to get on top of the Shine Gate without a rocket nozzle using a few methods, which technically means that Pianta Village is unlocked before Bianco Hills. Assuming this isn't a weird camera perspective thing, it's very likely that they removed the super ground pound block either A, because they figured if there was a way to get on top of the Shine Gate, that first time players wouldn't know how, or B, because they didn't want players to have to break the super ground pound block every time they entered Pianta. I mean, in the B scenario, they could have just done something similar to what they did with the giant pineapple blocking Serena. Once it's gone, but whatever. This is just speculation. Wanted poster names? This one is just bizarre. While playing Sunshine, you'll come across these wanted posters in the Plaza. There's some text on them, but they're otherwise too low res to make anything out. However, during the court cutscene, we get a close-up look of a wanted poster. And are those like usernames on it? Mika Calera, 110Ka, and Koban Maid? I wonder what these mean. To my 2024 Gen Z terminally online gamer brain, these look like usernames, but I don't really know if usernames would have been used like this as an Easter egg in 2002. Running with the username theory though, as it's my best guess, I looked through the game credits for any references to these names, but didn't find anything. Maybe it has to do with the Mario Club or something, or maybe something similar to Nintendo Power in the Link to the Past. I'm not really sure. I tried some pretty basic Google searches, but didn't come up with anything. This is probably the one true mystery on this entire Iceberg list. No succulent seafood. You know in the opening cutscene where Mario and Co are promised succulent seafood, and Mario's all like, oh, whoa, 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 whoa. Yeah, well that was a lie. El Delfino's only got fruit and shit. Next. Beta boat. This one could have gone in the Delfino Plaza section, but it was interesting enough to warrant its own spot. During the epilogue cutscene, once Mario and Peach land on the Coconut Island, you can see that one of the Plaza boats is sailing past them, except that it's actually a different boat than anything we see in game. Here are the main differences. It has a sort of tail, the awning has a smoother arch, the support beams are in the front and back instead of the sides, the weird leaf thing is on the back of the boat instead of the front, and finally, the cargo seems to be arranged differently. Pretty neat stuff. Beta Goop. In some of the cutscenes with Goop, it looks different. For instance, the Mario head-shaped Goop on the airstrip has a slightly different right ear from cutscene to in-game. And in the same cutscene, during the icky pain like Goop scene, the Goop itself just looks, I don't know, different. Like it's kind of darker or something. I might just be seeing things that aren't there. Or during the Flood introduction cutscene, it seems like the airstrip Goop is perhaps missing. And finally, during the court cutscene, the Plaza Goop seems entirely different. Not just missing the polluted piranha, but the Goop itself seems like flatter, if that makes sense. Map for sure shows beta stuff. Way back in this video now, when I was talking about Beta Delfino Plaza and counting the differences from cutscene to in-game, you may have noticed that I counted this leaf-looking object that is barely sticking past this building. There's a reason. That leaf is 1, not consistent with how the trees that are actually there are supposed to look, and 2, the leaf seems to be consistent with this type of palm tree. You know, the annoying ones that are hard to climb. What's more interesting though, is that on the map, if you click on Delfino Plaza, then look at the banner in the corner, then you can clearly see that those special hard to climb trees were originally there. And even better, you can actually see those trees in game if you look at the low detail version of the plaza from the airstrip. Neat. Nose Beach and Mouth Bay. Since we're already talking about the map, here's another fun tidbit about it. When you click on Delfino Plaza, you can see that different parts of the plaza are actually named. The beach seems to be called Nose Beach. Additionally, where the water canal opens into the ocean, that seems to be called Mouth Bay. The text here is super blurry and hard to read, but it helps that the names seem to correlate to where they are on the dolphin-shaped island that is Isle Delfino. There's some more text here, and even on some of the other clickable parts of the map, but it's too hard to decipher what they're supposed to say. Rushed 100% reward screen. Here in the depths of the Noki ancestral home, we get to the most obscure and sometimes frightening entries on this list. Let's start with the most frightening thing of all. 100%ing Super Mario Sunshine. Anyways, when you 100% Sunshine, you get a very short cutscene, well, picture really, that replaces the one with Piantissimo after beating Bowser. On top of this being a, let's be honest, lame reward for 100%ing the game, it's also pretty scuffed. I mean, first of all, it's in the casino, and then the shadows here are weird. Some of the Piantas look like they're hovering over the comically stretched boxes that are meant to look like stands. The comically stretched boxes that are meant to look like stands! Jesus, man. I was on something writing this. Yeah, the platforms NPCs are standing on, they're just stretched out wooden boxes. I decided to have some fun with this one though, and remake it in game for a nice, high quality version of the screenshot. Delfino cloning technology. Speaking of putting a bunch of Isle Delfino's NPCs into a single location, there's this scene during the epilogue cutscene that does just that. Except something is off. Maybe, just maybe, it has to do with all the cloned NPCs. There's 2, arguably 3 versions of the orange Pianta cop hanging out here. There's also 2 of the old Noki fishermen. And then there's also 2 of the blue Pianta cop. Does Isle Delfino have cloning technology? Is this how the sunglasses guy and the Duke sisters and the Pianta ship captain dude all show up in different levels, yet we never see them traveling? Petey being grown. During the opening cutscene, when Peach, Mario, and Toadsworth are all watching an advertisement for the island they've already booked tickets to and are landing on, there's a picture of Bianco Hills. And in this picture, there is something incredibly interesting. The Petey vines. But no Petey. Is it just me, or are you getting some serious deja vu? Oh, right. That's because a few entries ago, we made a very similar discovery about the Japanese Bianco M portal. The Petey vines are present, but appear to be in the wrong stage, as there's no Petey nor goop. However, these windmill platforms are present, which aren't supposed to appear until Bianco 3. Now, I actually have a theory as to what's going on here, but you're gonna have to hear me out on this one. In both Gelato Beach and Noki Bay, Sunshine employs a method of storytelling that uses the stage to physically show the player's progression. In the case of Gelato, it would be the Sandbird Tower, and for Noki, it'd be the waterfall and polluted ocean. Bianco already kind of does the same thing with the Petey vines. The vines exist when Petey the First does, then vanish once you defeat him. It's a lot shorter of a storyline than the other stages. But what if your first and potentially only altercation with Petey was meant to happen a bit later into Bianco? What if, for Bianco's first couple of stages before fighting Petey, you could actually still see the vines coming out of the windmill, with the implication that Petey would be growing inside? At face value, I think this is actually a pretty compelling reason for all the vine-related discrepancies. However, there are three major things that strain this theory a bit. First of all, while we have evidence that much of Bianco's episode order got rearranged throughout development, episodes 1 and 2, the episodes that Petey the First appears in, don't have any evidence of being rearranged, which you would sort of expect if the first time you were meant to fight Petey was supposed to be later in Bianco. Secondly, we can't really take this image from the opening cutscene as a serious piece of evidence for my theory, as the ramp that connects to the bridge is gone, meaning that this is clearly just Bianco 1 with the goop and Petey removed. And I guess they left the vines in as an oversight. It's not even that large of an oversight, and that's a good thing too. Honestly, it would be really bad if the entire story, or what exists of it anyways, was completely destroyed and plot holed by a bigger oversight in this very same picture. Huh. Mario was the real culprit all along. Exonerate Shadow Mario. So you're telling me that the Piantas have captured footage of Mario being on Isle Delfino before the graffiti incident, and people say that the court cutscene is BS? We must exonerate Shadow Mario now. Normal Mario was the real villain all along. We have proof. Jokes aside, it's just wild that they left Mario in this picture. To be fair though, it did take me 20 years to notice. This, however, isn't the only of these Isle Delfino preview pics that have some, well, let's just say interesting things going on in them. For instance, in this one shot of Delfino Plaza, there's like 3 layers of weird stuff happening here. First of all, both of the bells are already dirty, which doesn't make any sense in the context of the story. What's even more strange about that though, is that whoever got this screenshot went through the effort to clean the shine gate first, which you can obviously tell not just because it's, well, clean, but because it's rotated the wrong way. Also, the shine you get for cleaning the gate is visible in this picture. Oh right, I almost forgot. The Bianco M portal is just chilling there. It's almost like they just didn't care when taking this picture. And finally, there's a shot of Gelato Beach, which was taken before the blender shine was added. In fact, the blender is just outright gone, and instead there's a wooden column in its place. Combing through these cutscenes reminded me of the video where I discovered some beta secrets left behind on Sunshine's demo disc, which you can watch right here. Also subscribe.